I had someone ask me a question on another video of what they should do with a pack of flowers that they got that were too big to put in the little earring bezels. And so this video is about ideas you can do with those bigger flowers that come in those dried flower packs. Right here, I'm taking UV resin on a wooden earring. And this is a great way to use those bigger flowers in the packs you get because this is a lot bigger than those little bezels that you get. So you're going to have to paint the earring, and then you have to put a seal coat on it first. And then you take UV resin and your flower, and you very gently spread the UV resin along the earring, making sure not to pull any of the resin over on the sides. It's easier when you put some UV resin under the flower first, like I did, and then add some more resin on top little by little until it's completely covered. I find using a toothpick is the easiest way to do that. Here I'm just using the lighter to pop the bubbles, and a UV light for about 4 to 5 minutes in total will cure that resin, and it'll make a beautiful piece. Now here I'm using the UV resin tape. I'm adding my bezels and making sure all the edges are tightly secured onto the tape. You fill the bezel about halfway full of resin and make sure all the bubbles are out of it. And for this one, I'm going to take a flower that won't fit, and I'm actually going to cut it in half, and it makes a really cute earring that way. And a lot of times you'll get imperfect flowers that wouldn't necessarily look good in a piece of jewelry, and you can also cut them down and not use the sides that are imperfect and use those for a different purpose. For that one, then you just fill the rest of it with resin and pop the bubbles, and that earring is done. That is a great way to use some of those bigger flowers that wouldn't necessarily fit in there. You can just cut them down, and it makes a cute earring that way. And then you put the UV light on it. Again, I'm going to fill that about half the way full and pop all the bubbles. For this one, we're going to cut down the flower again, but this is a strange shape to cut a flower in, so we're going to just kind of have to eyeball it. So I'm going to cut it down and go from there, and then I just sort of measure it by looking at it. So I'm going to hold it up and see how much more needs cut off. Once you get it to size, then you can just place it in your bezel. For this one, I wanted to go ahead and add a little bit something more. So I'm going to actually put some of those foil flakes in with the flower. I'm just going to put that in a couple of the edges. You just sort of have to arrange those foil flakes to where they're not going to be overlapping on the flower and to where they're going to look nice, because they will cure instantly with the UV. Go ahead and pop your bubbles and fill it the rest of the way with the resin. And add the UV light. You'll notice that for these bezels, I like to just do one set of UV light at the end. I find it's easier. So another way to use those two big flowers, or if you just have some slightly damaged flowers that you can't use, you can tear those into pieces and make sort of a collage earring, which I love doing. I think the different shapes and sizes of the petals and the collars make a really pretty earring. So for this one, I've just torn up some of the ones that I've had that were slightly damaged, and even some of the pieces off of the one we just cut, the yellow one, and that is going to make a beautiful earring. And then you fill it the rest of the way full of your UV resin, and you pop the bubbles, and you put a UV light on it. I usually do about 4 minutes for these, and once you take them off the tape, you'll also want to put a UV light on the back as well. Here I'm going to fill this around halfway full, maybe 3/4 the way full with resin, just clear resin. And then I'm going to add, see, this would be way too big to use in an earring or something. So I find a good way to use those bigger flowers is to make coasters out of them. And sometimes you get these really big leaves. Now you can tear these leaves into pieces as well, which I also do. But if you want to leave them whole, this is a great way to do it. And I'm using some more of these leaves of that one piece that I had and just tearing those up in with it just to give it some added interest. And you have to sort of just maneuver it. Now, these pieces don't usually always stay right where you want them because that resin's going to be curing overnight. So just get it into a pretty good position, and you're going to pour more resin on top of it to cover those flowers. And this does take quite a lot more resin than, say, an earring would, but it's a great use of those big flowers if you want to keep them whole. And if your flower is not flat, I will say that can produce a lot more bubbles in your resin than, say, a flat flower would, just because the air gets trapped in between those layers of the flower and they rise during the curing process. Here, I'm going to go ahead and start using all of the little odds and ends that I've had from different projects. And I love the way this looks in a coaster. So you can see I've got some broken flowers, some cut flowers. I'm just going to take all of those, no matter what color, and just place them all together here in this coaster. And I've just used clear resin, and that way the flowers and the different colors and textures really stand out. I really like those flat, thin leaves in any of the projects I use. And just make sure you have different colors all throughout your coaster. And the tweezers are the best thing for this because you can pick up the little pieces and arrange it how you want. That way you're not really wasting any of the flowers that you have, or if you've cut them for a previous project, you're not wasting the rest of those flowers. You can use them in some way. Another way is to make keychains out of them. This is one of my favorite keychain molds, and I've already had the base collar laid. It was just clear resin and glitter I mixed together, and I let that dry overnight. And now these are beautiful flowers, and I thought they would look cute and a keychain, so I just went ahead and placed the flowers in and put clear resin on top. So this is another good use for some of those bigger flowers that wouldn't necessarily fit in a bezel earring. You'll just let those cure overnight. I'm going to go ahead and put some foil flakes in with this one, just because it would add some added interest. Sometimes the foil is hard to work with because it gets stuck on your utensil you're using. Just make sure it all gets folded underneath the resin. Sometimes the flowers will want to float to the top. You can either put resin on them and then place them down like underneath and then do this the next day, or you can glue them to the bottom if you would like. That way they don't raise to the top. Just make sure the resin's completely filled to the top. Now I'm going to add just some plain clear resin into these molds right here. And I'm just going to place the flower right into the clear resin. And I'm going to gently press on the middle where it's the hardest. And then very gently tap the petals. You don't want to damage the petals because it's very easy to do. Just make sure all that goes underneath the resin and try to pop out any of those bubbles. Bring those bubbles to the top. And a lighter is the easiest way to pop the rest of the bubbles. Here I'm just adding a little bit of glitter on top of there. And that's all I'll do for those. Just the clear resin, glitter, and one flower. And these will be keychains. Again, making sure the resin goes all the way to the top. Here's our finished projects. We have some keychains, coasters, and some different types of earrings, all using those bigger flowers that wouldn't have necessarily fit if we hadn't altered them in some way or found a bigger mold. I hope you enjoyed.